Bill Maher recently did a piece where he seemed upset and irritated that he and everything he stands for was rejected by an 18-year-old Chinese girl.
And finally, new rule. Someone has to tell China, you can steal our trade secrets, our software, and our intellectual property, but we draw the line at our hot freestyle skiers.
Now, while there may be some truth behind the idea that these talking heads of America are old men with personal insecurities, it's far more obvious that a large part of the country has melted down over the idea that talent could also flow out of America, just like it has always usually flown into America. Now, instead of any real reflection on why that could be, they simply attack people like Eileen Gu for leaving America and go on a tirade that illustrates exactly how unaware and out of touch with reality they really are. There are plenty of examples of this coming from many people, but for this, let's specifically focus on Bill and his piece that he put together.
We knew there were shithole countries, but who knew there was a shithole superpower?
Well, that's a very Trump-like way to start right out of the gate, calling China a shithole country. Who knew there was a shithole superpower, you ask? Well, Bill, if repurposing a defunct industrial park for a one-time use ski ramp is your idea of a shithole country, it's remarkable that the first time you didn't think to use the word shithole superpower wasn't when walking down Skid Row in a country with mass homelessness, with people who can't afford medical treatment, while their country steals billions of dollars from the Afghan people who are facing one of the biggest humanitarian crises they've ever seen.
But I'm sure you've heard about American citizen Eileen Gu, the beautiful model, influencer, and now gold medal winning skier who was born and raised here in America, but who chose to ski in the Olympics for China. Cool, huh? Is it?
I mean, yeah, Bill, it sounds pretty cool to me. Someone representing a country they have family heritage and connection to. Well, how about you?
Is that cool now? To choose to represent a totalitarian police state over America?
Choose to represent a totalitarian police state over America. Another totalitarian police state with the highest incarceration rates in the world and a one-party system with two different brand names that doesn't really do anything meaningfully different from one another, but generates a magical ability for its people to ignore or rationalize an identical issue differently. For example, when kids are in cages on the borders under your preferred political brand name. So basically, you're just upset she's not representing your preferred totalitarian police state.
The Olympics pretends to only be about sports, but of course the Games have always been a bit of a proxy war for which country has the best system. And by choosing Team China, Eileen Gu became a living symbol of China's triumph over the West, which wouldn't bother me so much if I thought China had triumphed over us in the ways that really matter, but they haven't. Now, we do have human rights issues right here at home, we do, but we're still, at least for another 3 years, a democracy based on freedom.
Now, I don't think that's really true. You're a democracy based on corporate interests, with politicians who retire from their positions suspiciously far richer than their government salaries could ever account for, and your human rights issues at home don't even scratch the surface. But I understand your self-centered view on, well, everything, doesn't allow you to look at what America does outside of that bubble, murdering their way across the globe, overthrowing governments, even democratically elected ones, installing dictators, arresting journalists who go a bit too far with exposing U.S. war crimes, jailing whistleblowers who told us America's drone strike programs kill civilians 9 out of 10 times. Then, after throwing him in prison, continuing to wipe out entire families like the children in Afghanistan who are running to hug their father returning home with drinking water, an airstrike that killed 10 out of 10 civilians this time. Your preferred totalitarian government calls for an international rules-based order, but sanctions the ICC the moment they even think about investigating U.S. war crimes in Afghanistan.
And they are an authoritarian surveillance state based on how'd you like to disappear for a few months?
Surveillance state. Well, I guess by that measure, Eileen shouldn't really be playing for America either if we're to take anything that Snowden uncovered for us into account.
Like that tennis player who recently vanished for a while when she said she'd been raped by a government official.
Really, Bill? I mean, Peng Shuai has come out multiple times since her blog has been twisted by the media. Did you want a 24-hour live stream on Peng Shuai or something? You know, Bill, if you cared as much about your own Olympians and athletes as you did China's, maybe you'd be talking a bit more about Chloe Kim and her struggles as an Asian American being spat on and shamed out of speaking Korean in public. Who knows? Maybe after you do that, you'll get ahead of the curve and begin understanding possible reasons as to why other Asian Americans might leave, rather than just attacking them for not sticking around. If your Chinese American scientists your government has been targeting and wrongfully accusing start to leave, are you going to blame them too? I mean, I just want to understand exactly how far can we go without triggering even a little bit of reflection.
We do still throw too many black people in jail, but perspective matters. China has basically jailed an entire ethnic minority, the Uyghurs, a situation that both the Trump and Biden administrations has called a genocide.
Perspective matters, Bill. Well, how about the perspective that there's no evidence of a genocide, and the Uyghur population has been increasing, there's no mass refugee crisis, and the few people being carted around by the U.S. government like Naira 2.0 left China legally on their passports, some of whom apparently had their passports renewed while they were under arrest. Sounds logical for somebody trying to be genocided, right? How about the perspective of the image that you're actually using? This isn't some kind of a leaked image. It's a photo from Chinese blogs showing a roadshow against religious extremism organized by a Muslim speaker. His roadshow also reached prisons because, like everywhere else in the world, prisons are a real thing that exists. But hey, that combined with the fact that Trump and Biden said it was a genocide must mean it's true, because politicians don't lie, and they especially wouldn't lie against a geopolitical target that they're in a virtual Cold War with, would they?
In 1997, Britain returned Hong Kong to China with an agreement that Hong Kong could retain its free press, honest courts, and democratic government. Well, they lied. Democracy and freedom are being crushed there.
Maintain their democratic government. I mean, do you actually think the Hong Kong people ever once voted for their British-installed governor? Freedom? Are you not aware that the first time there were ever clear and comprehensive laws protecting free speech was when Basic Law went into effect on the day of handover? Maybe you could do with comparing how the British police officers handled protests in the 60s. But for the protests you are using the images of, at that point in time, Hong Kong, according to a Western set of definitions for freedom put together by the Cato Institute using measurable and tangible metrics, put Hong Kong as the third freest place on earth. You know where America was, Bill? 17th. 17th.
2 years ago, when the general manager of the Houston Rockets, Daryl Morey, tweeted, "Fight for freedom, stand with Hong Kong," he was forced to apologize. In America, we're supposed to root for democratic government, not apologize for it. But the NBA has a television deal with China worth $1.5 billion. So LeBron James said Morey needed to be educated on the situation. The situation being, I got some shoes to sell.
I mean, well, Bill, to be fair, you just finished demonstrating that LeBron was absolutely correct. It appears that even you need to be educated on the Hong Kong situation, and you're supposed to be the political commentator here, champ.
Kowtow is a Chinese word, but boy, Americans have gotten good at it. For years, Google proudly refused to kowtow to Chinese censors, adopting the slogan, "Don't be evil." But the Chinese market proves so lucrative that, well, okay, a little evil.
If you're interested in Western internet platform censorship, I mean, it's a wonder you weren't concerned when Facebook and Twitter team up with, weapons manufacturers and the U.S. State Department decides on what political content can remain online, or when we learned that the U.S. ranks third out of the G20 nations requesting Google remove or censor content. I think your problem's a little bit closer to home here.
Some of Gu's defenders say it's racist to ask if she's still an American citizen, and she herself won't say. Why is that racist? Why was it racist to think that COVID might have originated from a lab leak as opposed to from eating bats? Besides the fact that the idea that COVID came from eating gross, weird food seems way more racist than the idea that it came from a high-tech lab.
It almost sounds as if you understand why going after the things a culture eats could be considered racist. Now, of course, some people will still look at that image that you blasted up on their screens and be grossed out by what Chinese people eat. Not a very great thing to happen while there's already a rise in anti-Asian hate crimes, but maybe the bigger problem is that you couldn't even find an image of bat eating in China. You had to choose an image from a restaurant in the South Pacific island of Palau to make your point. The anti-China bigots will forever be grateful to you, Bill. But hey, while we're talking about this bat eating thing, you know who else does eat bats? Americans, Bill. Maybe you could go down to the same smokehouse in Florida that NPR journalists wrote about in their far more exotic and playful tone than when it comes to foreigners eating the exact same thing.
If men were forcing women to wear this in, say, Massachusetts, would that go as unremarked on as it does?
Well, that's interesting, Bill, because forcing people to do things like this or live by a strict, rigid interpretation of a religion while Uyghurs were being slaughtered by terrorists in Xinjiang for not complying did go ignored by the West. What was it you said about perspective, Bill? This, however, is of course a little bit of perspective that begins to open up a conversation very inconvenient to where you'd like to take this whole thing.
In 2020, NBA players wore jerseys that said freedom.
Enes Freedom Cantor, what a lovely sight to end on. The man being celebrated by all your crooked, agenda-driven politicians, pushing him in front of the world to speak about human rights. Not American human rights abuses, of course, but specifically China's. You can almost see the strings hanging from him. If he does slip up and talk about universal human rights, there'll be a senator nearby to nudge him back on track.
And tell these folks who you are and what you care about and what we should be doing as a country.
I'm Enes Cantor Freedom. I play basketball in NBA, and I think what we should stand up for human rights and innocent people all around the world.
And you're specifically concerned about what's happening in China, where the Uyghurs are being subject to almost genocide and slave labor.
There are 2 million Uyghurs in genocide right now, in concentration camps, getting tortured and raped. So I feel like we need to stand up for those innocent people.
Yes. Hey, thanks for joining.
Putting pressure on athletes to speak about human rights abuses seems to be a one-way street, without the same pressures and obligations for athletes representing America to speak about American human rights abuses. Suddenly, they have the right to remain silent, or even told to shut up and dribble, as LeBron learnt when he did start speaking about local issues closer to home. Now, back to Enes Freedom Cantor, the guy you'd like to end on, or that you put near the end of your video. He is the same guy who said that the Chinese are invading America from the inside. They're in Wall Street, academia, big tech, sports, and more. Sounds kind of familiar. It's a look and feel that goes together really well with your AUKUS allies waving Nazi flags as they murder their way across the globe. But as this witch hunt for Chinese influence goes on, as Asian Americans are pushed in front of trains and murdered on their way up to their apartments, as Chinese American scientists have their reputations unfairly destroyed during this McCarthyism 2.0 push, you now search for Asian Americans who don't live up to your expectations and who aren't patriotic enough, soaking in a level of ignorance that makes it impossible for you to ever imagine that perhaps the problem is people like you, not with the people unwilling to put up with your bullshit.